In today's video then guys, we shall be taking a look at the 2011 MCU movie Thor, in which is the fourth installment in the MCU. So without further ado, let's get into today's review. So I thought then that this Thor movie really introduces the character of Thor. Obviously it's not going to be Hulk, is it? But it really introduces the character of Thor. It starts off the Thor franchise quite well, and it introduces the character to the MCU. And for those that weren't familiar, are now familiar with the character and get to know the character quite better, as we see how he becomes Thor and how he gets his powers of Thor taken off him for not being worthy enough anymore to hold the title of Thor and Odin's son. And I think that was something that I enjoyed, as I thought it was great how he had to earn the thing of being worthy again, and having to have that time away from being Thor to realise how important being Thor was, having his powers taken from him until he gets given them back when fighting Loki's big robotic fucking freak. And until that point, I think that Thor had to learn, and he thought that he would just pick up the hammer again and he would be worthy and he would, but that wasn't the case. He had to be worthy enough to be able to pick up the Mjolnir. And I think it was great how they explored that side of things. I really enjoyed that, as we haven't seen that yet from any superhero having to earn their place back again. And I think this was just one of many, and yeah, loved it. And I also loved how we find out about Loki, who is adopted, and that we see that he's actually King Loki's son, who Odin picks up as a kid. And that was something that we learned, and that is something that hopefully can be adapted on in future movies. See if he has the abilities of the Frost Giants and shit like that. And I think that, yes, I think he wasn't that good of a villain, but he expanded on his character, and I love the character development of Thor and Loki in this sense, as we're getting introduced to the characters, but we're learning more about them in each step of the way. I did think, though, as a whole, this movie seemed a bit of a mixed bag, as to me, at times you were like, oh, this is great, this introduces the character, this develops on Loki, Thor, and everything that we already know about Thor and things like that. Oh, it's great. However, then you see the bad side of it as the Shakespearean crap, which we'll get onto in a second. The problem being that we've seen the likes of Incredible Hulk and Iron Man be introduced in phenomenal ways, and then this one comes in and it doesn't light up a fire really. Gets off to a slow start. If we're being honest, it's not the most entertaining of MCU movies. However, I don't think it is as bad as The Dark World. Nothing on that level. I think it's just a decent watch in the MCU, and introduces the character, does what it needs to do, but nothing extra. And that's why I think this one is seen as a bit of a mixed bag. And as well, because Loki, I don't really think he is that good of a villain. I think he's a great character, just not a good villain. On the Shakespearean crap that I was getting onto a few minutes ago, was the fact that Thor and Loki and all the Asgardians speak in like thou shall and you shall and all that shit, and that just didn't work for me. And to me, although they're portioned from fucking Asgard, it doesn't matter. It just didn't work in any sense of the imagination. And we see, like in the Avengers movie that comes later down the line, and even in the Thor movies that follow, they sort of just go, we're going to push that Shakespearean shit aside and pretend it never existed. And I think, yeah, we see the slip of the word every now and again in the new Thor movies and shit like that, but we don't see it as much. And I didn't like this movie because it felt too Shakespearean, and that's not what a superhero movie should be. I also thought that the introduction to Hawkeye, also known as Clint Barton, I thought was good, even though I think this is another downside, as we saw in Iron Man 2, we saw the likes of, Scarlett Johansson make her debut in the MCU, and she was great as Black Widow. Obviously, half of the time she was undercover, but then showed herself as Black Widow at the end. And yeah, from that thing, she showed us what character she is. Is she aggressive? Can she fight? And we saw all that. We saw all of that in Iron Man 2. Getting back to my point, Hawkeye, however, he just pointed an arrow from like a forklift or some shit, or from a crane. And it was like he did nothing else. He didn't fight, he didn't show what he can do. All he had was a bow and arrow. So we knew he was Hawkeye. But other than that, I think we were just looking, going, is this all he's going to do? And I think they may as well have just introduced him in the Avengers movie or a different movie where he can have just 5 minutes to shine, because that's really all Scarlett Johansson had as the Black Widow in Iron Man 2, just right at the end. Although she had parts throughout the movie, like taking down Happy and things like that, she showed little glimpses of who she was. However, with Clint, I don't think we saw that. I really don't think we saw anything from him that made you go, oh, he's Hawkeye, he's a main guy, he's going to be a fighter, he's going to be able to fight off people. And even if it was just a little battle with Thor, all he did, like I said, was point a weapon at him, and anybody could have done that. Moving on, I thought that the predictability of the ending was far too predictable, but again, simplicity is always better than absolute bombing the finale, I guess. So in a way it worked, apart from maybe Loki's death, in which was unseen, and like, you know, not many of us expected that in the first movie for Loki's so-called death. Although we know that's not the final time he's in the MCU, as he's in plenty more times. Hit for the spoiler, but yeah, if you haven't watched the rest, go watch the rest and then come back to me and then realise, oh shit, he's in it a lot and dies a lot as well. Sorry for the spoiler there, but it's just the truth, innit? And as well as Loki's new season 1 surely should have given a hint that Loki's still alive. But you know, I also thought that Thor and Jane's relationship seemed like a bright spark in this movie, and seemed to be something that the MCU will be developing as times go on, and throughout the phases that we'll see being adapted and being made into something, develop these two characters. But for now, we'll see what happens in the next MCU movie in regards to Jane and Thor's relationship. Finally, I thought the cast were also amazing in this movie, and I don't really think if there was any problems or if there was a mixed bag that people think that Thor is, I don't think it's the cast that's bad. As we saw the likes of Chris Hemsworth, Anthony Hopkins, we saw the likes of Natalie Portman, we saw the likes of Idris Elba, Tom Hiddleston, we saw the likes of Clark Gregg, Stellan Skarsgård, we saw the likes of Jeremy Renner, we even saw Samuel Jackson and Stan Lee. To summarise the fourth installment then in the MCU, I thought that this was a decent movie for the Thor, but I think there's a lot more to come from Thor, hence why I've rated this a 7 out of 10 and a world-class film. So let me know down in the comments down below what your thoughts are, and if you haven't already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell to be alerted to all the new content that this channel creates, and I shall see you guys in the next one. Laters.